welcome to another episode of the Paperback Warrior podcast. We're really excited to bring you another episode, and we want to thank you so much for listening to our first two shows. We've gained a ton of positive feedback and some online buzz. We received likes and comments from our heroes like Max Allen Collins, Robert Randizzi, and Lee Goldberg. The show is now featured on Apple's podcast, so be sure to subscribe. It's also on Spreaker, YouTube, Radio Play, Castbox, Spotify, SoundCloud, and Stitcher. Of course, you can always check paperbackwarrior.com every Monday for the newest episodes. And Tom, I'm not bragging here, but man, we've made some footprints out there in the podcast universe. And we've really had a lot of fun doing it. Are we having fun with this thing? And I don't know, what do we have on tap today?
I'm really enjoying this podcast so far, and particularly the feedback we're getting. And we are sensitive to some of the comments that have been made about the sound. And as we kind of build out our sound studio better, I can promise soon we'll be sounding just like NPR. As far as what's happening today, we're going to be reviewing Super Cop Joe Blaze #1 and discussing the literary works of Jonathan Craig. And we're going to reviewing one of his short stories called The Girl in the Gold. But first, on the first episode, I talked about a trip I was going to take to a bookstore in Detroit. I've since taken that, and I want to tell you a little bit about this place. It's called John K. King Used and Rare Books in Detroit. And I said on the first episode that it was a old factory of some kind, and one of our listeners reached out for us and let us know that it used to be a glove factory where they made gloves. I speculated that they made brake pads or something like that. So it's this big imposing building in Detroit, and you go there and you feel like you're walking into some sort of horror movie situation. One, because it's Detroit, and two, because it's this terrible looking old warehouse. But you get in and it's just amazing. It's like a giant building, 4 stories high, and the staff is very professional. They're all wearing red smocks and organizing the books. And so listeners and readers of Paperback Warrior, I think, would want to go right to the second floor, which are the paperbacks. There's a special section for mystery, which was pretty sizable, and you could go through there and take a look. And there was an action-adventure section, which was decent. It wasn't as good as some of the other bookstores we've been to, but there was a lot of good stuff there. But after you finish those and you start grabbing the books you want, the paperbacks, then you notice that there's a general fiction kind of for non-genre books. But you get there and there's tons of the genre books there. It was filled with the general fiction, had just as many mysteries and action-adventure novels. And so obviously I'm looking for the vintage paperbacks. And the prices were actually pretty good. I think the cheapest book I got there was 50 cents. And the most expensive book, in kind of without being a super big collector's item, I saw was maybe $3.50, $3.95 tops. I mean, I ended up walking away with about 30 books for $60. So my average cost was about $2 a book. And it had tons and tons of old stuff, the type of stuff we write about on Paperback Warrior. The third floor has westerns, TV tie-in books, like if you want to get like a Welcome Back Kotter novel or a MASH novel or stuff like that. They had movie tie-in books if you wanted to get the novelization of, The Terminator or Butch Cassidy, the Sundance Kid. They had that. There was a giant science fiction section there. The third floor also had hardcovers, and so in the hardcover mystery section, I just sort of went through that. I didn't buy anything from there, but in the very end of the hardcover mystery section, it had just stacks of mystery magazines, both Ellery Queen mystery magazines, some old like chapbook zine type stuff, and lots of issues of Armchair Detective magazine, which is sort of an industry publication that had lots of reviews and stuff back in the days. So anyway, so I'm leaving. I actually spent 2 days there, about 2 hours each day. And on the last day, the woman who appears to be the manager, kind of this like really elegant African-American lady who I don't know if she's the owner, the manager, if she's related to John K. King, but she's really knowledgeable. She goes, "Oh, I see you like vintage paperbacks. I'd love to be able to show you our like secret vintage paperback room." And I was like, "Oh, now you're speaking my language." So she takes me upstairs to the second floor and takes me into this padlocked room. I had no idea what I was going to see because there's tons of vintage paperbacks in the normal store. So I go into the secret room. And she goes, "You have to understand, none of these books have prices in them. So if you find something you want, bring it to me and I'll tell you what the price is." I was like, well, that's kind of a weird way to do it.
Yeah.
And so you walk in the room and it's, I don't know, it's about the size, maybe it's 10 feet by 20 feet with a lot of shelves, incredibly well organized. But here's how it was organized. It was organized like a comic book store where like it had like a Fawcett gold medal section. And then you'd go to the Fawcett gold medal section. You'd see like this sea of yellow spines like the Fawcett gold medals had in the 1950s. And each book, instead of being organized by title or author, it's organized by the serial number of the Fawcett Gold Medal book. So, Fawcett Gold Medal book number 3 is the 1333 is the Ambushers by Donald Hamilton, and next to that would be 1334, which may be a Western, and so. It's really difficult to find what you're looking for there unless you know what the serial number is of that particular Fawcett Gold Medal book.
Yeah, I was going to say, how in the world would you locate titles there if you're looking for a specific author or a title? I don't know serial numbers.
Well, Eric, that's because you and I are readers, not collectors. But there are people out there who collect books and never open their books and keep them in plastic, and it's very important for them to get like an entire run of Ace double Westerns. And so this would be the way to do that because they're all in that kind of order. But it was impossible to search in any meaningful way or browse. Because eventually, and you know this, when you go to one of these used bookstores, you kind of adjust your eyes where you don't have to read the spine of every book. You're looking for something thin that looks like it's going to be about 200 pages. Maybe you're looking for something that looks a little worn with age. Maybe you're looking for something with the yellow spine, which would sing out Fawcett Gold Medal, or the LB for leisure books at the top of it, or the Manor books. Everyone had their little logo. But when you're in a sea of books where the entire shelf is exactly that same logo and that exactly same color, it's hard to find the forest for the trees.
Yeah, it sounds a little bit overwhelming. So does she... I'm assuming that she knows what she has there, and it's the reason why it's locked.
Here's what's weird. Well, yeah, she knows that there's value to these books, but she also said that most of those books have been in that room for 50 years. This bookstore's been around for a long time. And so one of the folks in our Facebook group, as I was recounting the story there, says that that what happens is if you pick out a book, and I ended up not picking out any books from that room because I had no idea what I needed, and like I said, it was a bit overwhelming. But there wasn't just Fawcett Gold Medal. There was the Ace books, the Bantam books. There was actually Lion books had a section. So it was amazing, but it was, like I said, difficult to browse. But I guess if you take one off the shelf, what she does is she looks online and tries to get an understanding of what market price is for that on Amazon or eBay and gives you some version of that. But one of the guys in their Facebook group indicated that she's really only charging about $5 a book from that room, which is an incredible deal. And the books were in pretty good shape. They weren't in plastic, but they were in good shape. And so I ended up not getting anything. But as I'm checking out, she's like, did you find anything up there? I was like, no, it's a little overwhelming because I don't know what the serial numbers are for any of the authors I like. And I didn't have the time to go look at every single spine in there. And she pointed to some old reference book, like Books in Print or something like that, where if you tell her that you're looking for, the Jonathan Craig book, The Case of the Vengeful Virgin, she can go and take a look at that and tell you that was Fawcett Gold Medal number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then you could go back up there and pull that off the shelf. And so she's willing to do the legwork for you. And so what I need to do when I return to Detroit again, and I will return because that place was amazing, is actually create like a want list, do my homework online to find out who the publisher was and what the serial number was of that book, and then or have her send her an email ahead of time saying, hey, I'm coming by on Tuesday at 2:00. These are the 40 books I'm looking for. Can you research and tell me if you guys have those, particularly in the secret book padlocked room? But it was amazing. You asked me if it was as good as Chamblin's books, the bookstore we talked about that's in Jacksonville, Florida. I'd say it was just as good, if not better, but it was much better for me because I've picked that place clean. And having a place that's about the same size where it's just virgin territory for us to plunder was a total pleasure.
Sounds like I need to convince my daytime job to send me to Detroit for a meeting. I definitely need to go there.
That's the trick.
Yeah, but I will say that I am going to Dallas in September, and that's home of
Half Price Books. So. And their flagship store is amazing. It's big. It's like an old time like Barnes and Noble or Borders books, but all used books with great prices. There's it was where I bought my first copy of J.R. Roberts' Gunsmith. It's the Dallas flagship store for Half Price Books. Will blow your mind.
So how do I get 100 books on an airplane?
You make some room in your bring a bigger suitcase than you need to. That's what I always do on my business trips.
Yeah, okay, makes sense. All right, sounds good. All right, so Tom, you reviewed a book called Alley Girl back in early 2018. I think it was like maybe April. It's on our paperbackwarrior.com site. It was later renamed Renegade Cop, which made a lot more sense in relation to the story. Something you had mentioned in your review was really surprising to me. you mentioned that the book's author, Jonathan Craig, wrote a police procedural series called The Sixth Precinct, and how you believe it may have capitalized on Ed McBain's, I guess, wildly popular 87th Precinct series. However, what was really interesting to me was that you did some research, and you were surprised to see that Jonathan Craig beat Ed McBain by a full year. Ed McBain, of course, is, I believe, Evan Hunter is his real name, correct?
He was born Salvatore Lombino. He legally changed his name to Evan Hunter and then had literary success as Ed McBain. So this is a man of 1,000 faces.
Yeah, that's a real mess that we'll have to get into at some point in the future. But anyway, so you think that Craig beat McBain by a full year. So I was really excited when you sort of latched on to that author last year and you started reviewing more of his work. So tell us a little bit about Jonathan Craig.
All right, so Jonathan Craig's become a bit of an obsession for me lately, and probably outweighing the quality of his work is my interest in his life. His real name is Frank E. Smith, and he was died in 1984 at the age of 65. He was, I don't know where he was born. I think he might have been born in California, but he grew up as a young man in Kansas City. But he was one of these Florida authors, I think, by the time he reached some prominence. Background-wise, he was an interesting fella. He joined the Navy in World War II, but I don't know if he ever saw combat because he tested so high, he ended up becoming like a head research analysis at the Pentagon back then for war planning. He was a personal advisor to Harry Truman in 1945, and he began a literary career shortly after the war, writing for the pulps. He wrote westerns for Mammoth Western and Thrilling Western pulp magazines. He was represented by a literary agent by the name of Scott Meredith. And Scott Meredith is very significant because he represented kind of a who's who in post-pulp fiction during the paperback original era. And what Scott Meredith did was very smart. He became kind of the content editor for Manhunt magazine. And we're going to be doing an episode next week on Manhunt magazine that you don't want to miss. We're going to be talking about its significance because if you're into these kind of books, you need to know more about Manhunt magazine. The important thing to know for the Jonathan Craig story is that Jonathan Craig was a regular contributor to Manhunt magazine. Nearly every month or every other month, there was a Jonathan Craig story there, which was convenient because Scott Meredith was his literary agent and the publisher. He also wrote some standalone novels. In 1952, he wrote one of those kind of early, like, drug craze, fear, juvenile delinquent novels called Junkie.
Fun.
That was re-released in 1962 under Frenzy. I think both had exclamation points at the end to create that sense of anti-drug urgency, important in the 1950s and 60s. A few of his books are still, I think Junkie and Frenzy are still available on Kindle, as well as his standalone novel, Red-Headed Sinners. We talked about Alley Girl from 1954 that was retitled Renegade Cop because it neither had an alley nor a girl in it. My favorite standalone novel by him is a 1957 book called So Young, So Wicked, which I reviewed on the Paperback Warrior site. It's packaged as like a juvenile delinquent story, as if you're going to be reading this book about a seductive 15-year-old. It's really an awesome hitman story about a hitman who is basically assigned to murder a 15-year-old girl, and he's trying to figure out why he needs to murder her before he does. And it's just an amazing standalone noir novel. But what I want to talk about a little bit is what you alluded to, is his work in the police procedural genre, which I would argue began in 1955, in January 1955, when he wrote a standalone novella for Manhunt magazine called The Floater, which has been available on Kindle from Wildside Press. I don't know if they still have it there, if there's some copyright issues. But the question always arises on who came first, Ed McBain or Jonathan Craig. And I think it's Jonathan Craig came first before Ed McBain as far as writing police procedurals, but they were both beaten to the punch by Dragnet, the TV show, which debuted in 1951 and made all of America absolutely gaga for police procedural stories. And so I don't think if there wasn't a Dragnet, there would be a series, two different series, and I'll talk about them in a second, from Jonathan Craig, or an 87th Precinct series from Ed McBain. So I would say, so he writes this book, he writes the story, kind of a long story, The Floater, in January 1955, but then he immediately shifts gears to a different character by the name of Steve Manning, an NYPD character, and his partner for 7 stories and novellas between 1955 and 1956, all of which were in Manhunt, called the Police File series. And the gist behind the Police File series is they were all in Manhunt. Some of them were novellas, some were short stories, but they were all branded as like, this is a Police File story. And they were just very straightforward, objective police procedural stories starring this detective, Steve Manning, and his partner, which again, I think owed a lot to Dragnet. There was no real emotion in these stories. It was very, you never heard the character say, like, I'm trying to stay objective, Sarge, but I just care too damn much. There was none of that there. It was always just very logical steps the police took to solve these crimes. And the only one of the Police File stories that exists to this very day is as in a standalone book. It's called Classification Homicide. It was reprinted by an outfit called Armchair Fiction that produced a lot of doubles, like Ace doubles recently. And it's still available on Amazon. I reviewed Classification Homicide on the site. It's a 75-page novella. And so most of I think there's a couple novellas in the Police File series. But again, we're talking 7 stories from 1955 and 1956. And go ahead.
Yeah, just stop you for just 1 second.
Yeah.
So you also wrote a Paperback Warrior primer, which on our site that's is basically a column just overlooking an entire series, sort of from a sky level view, not particularly one particular novel, but the whole series. But you wrote a Paperback Warrior primer about Jonathan Craig, but it was about a series of books, and I'm trying to think of the name of it, but it was Pete Selby.
Yes.
So is Pete Selby, was that part of the cop series that he did? Or
well, this is what's weird, Eric. Okay, so what happens is this. Jonathan Craig launches his most successful series in 1955 it originally began as the Pete Selby Detective Series about an NYPD detective named Pete Selby. He had a partner named Stan Rader, and so it must have been successful. It was on Fawcett Gold Medal. They did a very bad job of packaging them as a series. They don't have uniform covers the way the Matt Helm books or the Travis McGee books had at the time, and so the covers are all over the place. But what we have here is 10 books that came out between 1955 and 1966, all on Fawcett Gold Medal, that were released as originally the Pete Selby series, and then the Pete Selby and the Stan Rader series. What's weird is that there is no discernible difference that I could find between the Pete Selby books and the Police File books starring Steve Manning. It's almost like he repurposed the Police File stories into a novel series. What I don't get is why he just didn't start doing Police File novels. And the first one was The Dead Darling in 1955, and it ends with The Case of the Brazen Beauty in 1966. And again, they're all very straightforward, rather hard-boiled police procedurals. In the 1950s and early 60s, the idea of being nude was a real novelty, and so most of the stories begin with a nude woman being found somewhere, and the police needing to investigate why this nude woman is dead. And unanswered questions to me is why create a new series? Why don't just continue the Police File series after Pete Selby? What's even weirder is that there was overlap. He continued to write stories from the Police File series in November 1955, the one called The Man Between, and in January 1956, one called The Cheater, at the same time that he's cranking out The Dead Darling and the novels in the Pete Selby series. So jump forward in time. One last thing to know before we kind of go into our reviews is that the series dies in 1966, and then Belmont Tower, a rather low-end publisher in the 1970s, begins republishing these books, and they rebranded them. They became known as the Sixth Precinct series. And I believe that they call them the Sixth Precinct series to create some kind of market confusion on the 87th Precinct series that Ed McBain by that point was having tremendous success. And so I don't remember how many there were, how many they reprinted, but Belmont Tower reprints the Sixth Precinct series, which were just the old Pete Selby books from the 1950s and 60s. They renumbered them because it's Belmont and they're screw-ups, but the order doesn't really matter, and I don't know that they released them all. I don't know how many they did, but the covers on the Sixth Precinct series are like blood on the knuckles, men's adventure numbered books, whereas the other ones are just sort of appear to be standalone novels starring a police officer named Pete Selby. So I guess that's everything I know about Jonathan Craig. I want to give credit to some of the folks out there on the internet who did a lot of this research for me. One is, it's difficult to find anything about Frankie Smith as a person except for a Wikipedia site in French. So you need to dump the French Wikipedia site explaining what this guy's life was all about, Frankie Smith, into English to read about it. But someone did a lot of the work for me, a blogger who blogs under Killer Covers of the Week, did a really nice article several years ago on him, which is where I get a lot of that information. And so that's pretty much it. Let's go into our reviews.
All right, sounds good. All right, so you kind of moving from one your cop series over to another one, and so listen to this. Tom lets me borrow a 3-book series called Super Cop Joe Blaze. Again, just like what he mentioned earlier, these were released by Belmont Tower in 1974, and they were a bit too lowbrow for Tom's taste.
That's saying a lot.
And he knows that I'm ecstatic about these Hall of Shame books. We've got a section on the site called Hall of Shame. Just look on the right-hand side. There's tags. If you want to get in the Hall of Shame, you'll have to be a novel like Road Blaster or Swamp Master or Phoenix or something stupid like that. So Tom hands me these books, and when he's doing it, he's holding each one with just the ends of 2 fingers, like this is biohazard material. So he deposits them over to me, so I'm ecstatic to get this 3-book series of Super Cop Joe Blaze. But I think the idea was to capitalize on Dirty Harry, which came out theatrically in 1971. I'm assuming that Harry Callahan, which of course is played by Clint Eastwood, was kind of the catalyst behind not only Super Cop Joe Blaze, but probably other titles along the same lines in that era. So the mystery of the author is kind of is really interesting. The series is penned under the house name of Robert Novak, and there's no indication anywhere that this is a real person. But it's interesting to see that no one has clear-cut evidence of who actually wrote the first 2 books of the series. The debut is called The Big Payoff, and the second book is called The Concrete Cage. The final installment, which is called The Thrill Killers, was written by our friend Lynn Levinson, a great author who wrote titles like The Rat Bastards and The Sergeant.
He is so good.
Yeah, we've reviewed both The Rat Bastards and The Sergeant, and he's been a pretty good supporter of Paperback Warrior as well. He's a great author and a really good friend of ours. I haven't read The Thrill Killers yet. I'm kind of looking forward to reading that one. I have read The Big Payoff and Concrete Cage, so. Really, the sort of the subject of my first or the first novel is who actually wrote it. Again, it's speculation that Robert Novak isn't an actual person that wrote these books. There's speculation out there that Nelson DeMille actually authored the first 2 books. He created a similar series, which is called Riker. And in that series debut, which is called The Sniper, confusingly enough, he erroneously places the name Blaze in place of Riker in parts of the text. So Joe Blaze is in error inserted into the spots where Riker should be.
So at one point he was writing a Blaze novel that became a Riker novel, or vice versa.
Yeah, it's like DeMille wrote the Joe Blaze novels as part of the Riker series, but the publisher decided to branch off and just create a new series out of DeMille's writing. So I think in all intentions he had basically wrote these books as part of the Riker series, but then the publisher said, hey, let's capitalize on this and make 2 series. And
this is long before he was a bazillionaire best-selling author.
Right, exactly. This is before hardcover Nelson DeMille arrived. This is paperback Nelson DeMille of the 70s. So I'm going to say kudos to the site, Glorious Trash, which a lot of us frequent. He did some legwork on the series, and he also interviewed Lynn Levinson about his part of the series. And interesting, in that interview, Lynn states that he was given the idea for contributing to the series by author Peter McCurtain, who wrote, what was the Assassin series that McCurtain did? The Marksman.
Yes.
Yeah, which should be another episode, because that's a complete freak show on that particular series. But honestly, none of this really even matters, but it's fun to dissect as an action-adventure enthusiast, I suppose. Quickly here, just to kind of go through the review, there's not a lot to talk about, honestly. The debut Super Cop Joe Blaze book is, of course, called, I'm losing my mind here, The Big Payoff. And it's universally panned everywhere. I was surprised that I really actually enjoyed this. Surprisingly enough, it was actually decent. I mean, this isn't Ed McBain by any means. It's a Neanderthal cop with absolutely no backstory whatsoever. It's just like 1, 2, 3, go fight bad guys. Literally from page 1. With really nothing to go on other than Joe Blaze is this large cop. For some reason, Tom, I picture him as Kevin Arnold's dad in Wonder Years. Remember the Wonder Years show?
Yeah, I remember it, but I don't remember his father specifically.
Okay. Well, Kevin's dad is a husky guy, short hair, clean shaven, and fought in Korea. And he's basically disgruntled with life. Joe Blaze is Kevin Arnold's dad, bottom line. The storyline for the first book is a sex killer is targeting New York City hookers. Blaze is the sergeant on the case, and he teams with his partner Nuthall and reports findings to a Captain Coogan. These 3 characters are really it for the whole series. Nuthall, Coogan, and Blaze. That's it. Blaze beats on doors, interviews hookers, protects hookers in some cases, and there's a long car chase scene, which is actually pretty well done, sort of in the middle of the book. There isn't much in the way of shooting or fistfights, but it's badass when it needs to be. I thought it was really touching to see that Blaze collects money from the police force and gives a portion of his check to a cop's widow every month. It's a nice inclusion to what is otherwise just an average cop procedural. I did read the second book in the series, as I mentioned, and that review will be online at paperbackwarrior.com in late August. Look for the review of this particular novel, the debut, later this week on Paperback Warrior. Or heck, maybe we will discuss it here on the show. I don't know. I thought the sequel wasn't as good, but more on that later. Maybe we'll talk about it, maybe not. You can read more of the Super Cop Joe Blaze reviews, again, at Paperback Warrior this week and in late August, and I'll probably tackle the third book at some point. And while I was talking, I was looking at Abe Books. And Abe Books, you can probably get these titles for about $5 or below, depending on whether there's free shipping or not. So these are available if you really want to delve far enough and grab them. I don't necessarily recommend doing that, but go ahead if you want to.
Our readers, I think, from our traffic, like our bad reviews more than they like our good reviews for some reason.
Yes.
I want to shift gears to a quick review, and I'm not going to belabor this because I've talked about Jonathan Craig a lot, but he wrote a story called The Girl in Gold that appeared in September 1970's issue of Alfred Hitchcock's mystery magazine and has been reprinted in the Alfred Hitchcock anthologies Grave Business, Borrowers of the Night, and Portraits of Murder. And here's what's interesting about it. It is a Pete Selby 6th Precinct story, but it takes place, it was written 4 years after the last novel, right? So he writes The Case of the Brazen Beauty in 1966, retires the character, and then for some reason 4 years later, he writes a 20-page short story for the Hitchcock magazine called The Girl in Gold. My theory is that at that point he was beginning to get some nibbles about bringing the series back as reprints for Belmont Tower, and he wanted to create interest in the series again. That's just a theory. And anyway, Girl in the Gold, it's a good read. It's a quick read. It begins with a boy flagging down officers Selby and Rader to show them a man who landed in the alley behind the Manhattan Hotel, presumably after coming from a third-floor window above. They visit the hotel and they find a third-floor room where a guy named Harry Lambert lived, in a hotel glass with lipstick on the rim, all these clues. There's jewelry cases in the room or missing the gold and diamonds they once had. And it's a very straightforward mystery. I enjoyed the heck out of it. And there's a fantastic twist at the end that I think propels the story from being a good story to a great story. This shouldn't be a hard story to find. It's not available digitally that I've seen in any legal way. But the Alfred Hitchcock paperbacks are available, and some people have old copies of the magazine. So we'll leave it at that. I think I've talked plenty about Jonathan Craig. I just think it's interesting that this character came back. And if any readers know of any other Sixth Precinct or Pete Selby short stories or novellas other than the 10 novels and this one short story, please let me know, because I'm interested in learning more about this guy and what he was up to.
Yeah, you can email us at paperbackwarrior@yahoo.com. You can follow us on Facebook, Twitter. So if you know anything, send us a message.
All right, so this week on paperbackwarrior.com, you can look for reviews of a book called Blood, Lust, Orgy by Harry Whittington. Let me explain that really quickly. Harry Whittington was a great author who wrote a 30,000-word story, more of a novella, I guess, called The Crooked Window in 1956. He was unable to sell that. Fawcett Gold Medal, I think, rejected it, and other places may have rejected it. By March 1966, he was writing a lot of books under pseudonyms for a porno book company called Nightstand Books. And so he basically repackages The Crooked Window in March 1966, and it gets published as a nightstand book called Bloodlust Orgy under the pseudonym of John Dexter. And then somehow he's able to, in November 1966, just a few months later, get the original The Crooked Window novella published in Shell Scott Mystery Magazine. And that's how I read it. And so I'm not going to tell you if it's good or bad. You got to stay tuned to paperbackwarrior.com to find out. Now, you did a review of a book called Siberia 10 by Clark Howard. Give us a short synopsis of who he is and what that book's about.
Yeah, I kind of fell in love with Clark Howard on a book that I reviewed, I guess it was last month, called Last Contract, which was a really interesting and unique Hitman book. It was really good. Clark Howard seems to be a really great talent. So I jumped on Siberia 10, mostly because of the cover. Honestly, it has a great cover, but it was another Clark Howard novel that I came across. So it's really good. It's different. It would make a really great Netflix show. I wish I had money to invest in script and to put that out, but it's a really great story about a captain from Vietnam. He gets pulled out of Vietnam and gets sent to the coast of California, somewhere near San Diego. And basically, the prison camp there for the soldiers is become corrupt. The prisoners are being mistreated. The African Americans are fighting with the white soldiers. The white soldiers are fighting with the African Americans, and they're both fighting with the guards. So the captain gets sent in to clean the place up and try to make sense of the stockade. Along the way, he meets a lot of really fun characters. Some of the book is funny. It's got a lot of great humor to it. Some of it is a little bit violent. There's a lot of crude language, of course, because it's a stockade and these are soldiers and prisoners. But it's a really great story, really unique. If you're looking for something just really different in terms of military fiction, this is the one you want. If you're not reading Clark Howard, put down whatever you're reading and get a Clark Howard novel. I've got 2 more to read in my collection, and Tom gave me another one tonight. But yeah, and we're also going to be reviewing real quick. We've got 5 reviews this week, obviously, but Bloodlust Orgy, Siberia 10, Bodyguard number 6, among others. But I think that's it, right?
Yeah, I mean, Bodyguard is a cheesy series from the 1980s, shockingly about a bodyguard with lots of sex and violence, and you can read all about that in my review.
Great. So that wraps up this particular episode. Be sure to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube. You can subscribe there for new episodes. And again, the show episodes are available on Apple Podcasts. So again, be sure to subscribe there. You can stream us on Spotify. You can stream us on Spreaker. And of course, you can go to paperbackwarrior.com. The player is embedded on the right-hand side of the screen. Or you can just follow along every Monday when we post the new episodes there. You'll find plenty of ways to contact us. Again, paperbackwarrior@yahoo.com. Don't hesitate to drop us a line and let us know how we are doing and what you want covered right here on the show. So thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next week with some talk about war. We promise you'll love it. Bye-bye.